My brother, Justin, suffers from middle child syndrome. I'm going to send him this video. On National Siblings Day a few weeks ago, he sent me a little Facebook meme that read, "Happy Siblings Day from Mom's favorite." The condition has been with him for many years. When we were kids, we used to shoot hoops out in the driveway. If I would miss and he would get the rebound, he would catch the ball and pretend he saw something down the road. When we were at my grandparents' house watching TV, Justin would turn the TV to the news and leave it there. Now, he didn't want to watch the news, but he knew nobody else did either. And he knew that if anyone argued, my grandpa would side with him because my grandpa would get into the news. When we would call him out, Justin would say, "It's a free country. Even freedom in the wrong hands can be misused." Freedom and responsibility are our themes this month, and unlike my brother Justin, Unitarian Universalists have a long history of true freedom. We were there 400 plus years ago when religious freedom went viral. It happened at the invention of the printing press, which touched off the Protestant Reformation. These things are never so neat, but about in that time period. People who had previously been discouraged from reading the Bible for themselves have been told, "Don't worry, your priests will tell you," were able to get a copy of their scripture and read it for themselves for the first time, if they were fortunate enough to have the money and the ability to read or know someone who could. After giving it a read, a lot of people decided their priests had been wrong, that if they were really going to follow the Bible's teachings, they would need to reform the Catholic Church or even start their own churches separate from the Roman Church. You probably know all this. Hang with me. The left wing of the Reformation included people like Martin Luther, whose call for reform included doing away with indulgences, this practice of the church of asking people to give money so that they could see their grandparents in heaven, or I'm exaggerating a little, but not a lot. It may surprise you that, it may not surprise you rather, that the Unitarians were sort of left of the left wing of the Reformation. They didn't just call for reformation of practices, they insisted on the right to believe that God is one, in opposition to the Christian doctrine of the Trinity, which insisting that God is one implies that Jesus isn't God. They refused to impose creedal tests of faith as a condition to join the church. In Poland, in Transylvania, and in other parts of Europe, Unitarianism sprang up and sometimes thrived during the Reformation. Martin Luther found Unitarianism particularly dangerous since he believed Unitarianism gave rise to Muhammad and Islam. He said Unitarians' time in hell was increasing every day by one day, every day that the Unitarian heresy persisted. This was a math problem to Luther, and he had solved it. But the freedom to practice faith as it burned in the human heart, not as it was written in a creed, was worth fighting the establishment for. We have heroes of religious freedom in our religious heritage. In the mid-1500s in Transylvania, the Unitarian court preacher Francis David persuaded King John Sigismund to issue the Edict of Toleration in Torda, Transylvania in 1568. It read in part, in a time when there were national churches that were the official religion of the country, in every place the preacher shall preach and explain the gospel, each according to his understanding of it. And if the congregation like it, well. If not, no one shall compel them, for their souls would not be satisfied, but they shall be permitted to keep a preacher whose teaching they approve. Therefore, none of the superintendents or others shall abuse the preachers. No one shall be reviled for his religion by anyone. A glorious golden moment in Transylvania. But as soon as King John died, Francis David was imprisoned for his ideas, and he died a captive, a martyr of religious freedom. About the same time, Michael Servetus was burned at the stake by John Calvin and his followers. I remind my Presbyterian colleagues of this every chance I get. He was burned with a copy of his book strapped to his thigh. It's said that a change in one word would have saved Servetus from the fire if he had only been able to say Christ, the Son of God, rather than Christ, a Son of God. This heresy, which implied that there was room at the table of God's acceptance for other faiths than Christianity, cost Servetus his life. In Poland, Faustus Socinus and his followers rejected the divinity of Christ and the immortality of the soul. They eventually earned themselves expulsion from Poland, and they went to the Netherlands, to Prussia, and to Transylvania, where they got to know some of the Transylvanian Unitarians and eventually adopted the name for themselves. Freedom of thought and religion are the hard-won foundation of Unitarian Universalism. We insist on the freedom of each person to pursue their truths on their chosen path. We encourage each other to check things out for ourselves. Instead of original sin, we proclaim something like what the great contemporary thinker Matthew Fox called original blessing. The idea that all creation, including humanity, is infused not with sin, but with inherent holiness, inherent blessedness. For these and other beautiful ideas, Fox was expelled from the Dominican order by Pope Benedict, by the way. We have always sided with the freethinkers, the innovators. And in fact, we promise when we become Unitarian Universalists that we will become heretics ourselves, that we will walk the path of life with intention, exploring meaning and truth with those with whom we're in community. From those early pioneers who paid with their lives down to today, we carry on the heritage of free faith with our siblings in places like Reform Judaism and the United Church of Christ and many others. It would make a terrible bumper sticker, but I think there's something to the slogan, Unitarian Universalism, the logical result of the Protestant Reformation. But I'm clearly not in the bumper sticker writing trade. Either way, in our day, a new Reformation is here. Something new and something very old are calling our name at the same time. In the Protestant Reformation, information became available quickly to a greater number of people. The poorest still couldn't access books, and if they could, they often couldn't read them. But opening the flow of information to even a limited number of people democratized faith. Eventually, people began to more easily think for themselves, to more easily disseminate their ideas, to freely associate in their chosen religions. And now, to give a sense of what's changed in our time, take a look at this image to start. This was taken in 2005 at the election of Pope Benedict. This is St. Peter's Square. 2005 was just sort of at the beginning of the adoption of the smartphone. Now, take a look at this second image. This is 8 years later. 8 years. In 2013, the same place, St. Peter's Square at the election of Pope Francis. Just take a look at the change. In that first picture, there was like one little flip phone in the corner, and some technological wizard had figured out how to take a picture, and now, everywhere. Thank you, Cody. Every one of those phones in that picture, every one of those tablets, has the capacity to store all the information in a library many times over. In the last 20 years, information has been democratized in ways Martin Luther, Francis David, and Michael Servetus couldn't have dreamed of. We don't even have to go find it. It's coming at us constantly. A swarm of information. We walk around in it. The availability of information seems to be fueling all sorts of other changes, including the biggest shift in religious identity, some are saying, since the Reformation. The most dramatic of which is the shift from an affiliation in religion to no affiliation in religion at all. We can move easily from religious tradition to religious tradition or to no tradition at all. The information is as close as our pockets. Just the other night, we were playing cards with some friends whose mother was in town from Ohio. She's a member of the Church of the Brethren, and I'm one of these people who, in almost every congregation, breaks the rule, no politics and no religion. In a nice way. So I said, tell me about the Church of the Brethren. I only knew a little bit. By the time she was finished, I had my phone out, looking things up myself, and she asked me, how did I do? At which point I was able to say really well, you only missed the date of Alexander Mack's baptism in the 1700s by 1 year. But that's the process. My friend sparked my curiosity, and the information was at my fingertips. And really the only thing I needed an expert for was to spark my curiosity. I teach Bible courses differently than I used to. In fact, just a few years ago, the first course I taught here, I tried to be the sage on the stage. And somebody brought in a print-off from the Atheist Bible with the little notes. And somebody brought in something else printed off the internet. And by the end of the class, I was saying, what does your version say? What does your version say? And I know a little bit about the languages, and we can talk about that. We're still searching, though, for something. Knowledge isn't in some repository anymore. It's not in the mind of a priest or a library full of books or an expert in the field necessarily. It's in the cloud. It's in our hands. That's, to me, the logical result of the Reformation, but there's still this ancient human need. Many of us start looking for that need as soon as we wake up. What's the first thing you do if you have a smartphone on your bed or beside your bed? What's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning? Does anybody check Facebook? Nobody checks Facebook? Come on. Yeah, okay. We're going to tell the truth in a minute. It's going to, yeah. We communicate often with our loved ones. We might look at email. We send a message to 500 of our closest friends. We look at their cats. We tweet. We make Vine videos. We put pictures on Instagram. All this technology, all this freedom of information hasn't changed one important thing. We are still the meaning-making animal. We make meaning in the same way we always have, in community. We still want to interpret the information we find in the same ways we always have, in community. With apologies to my brother, it has never sustained the human spirit just to say it's a free country. Freedom is for something. What will your freedom lead to? We have all this freedom that brings us all this information. What will our freedom lead us to do? Will we make the world better somehow? Will we drive wedges between people with all this information and freedom? Or will we use it to bring people together? Here's why I believe our faith is perfect for this time. In this age of instant exchange of fact-based ideas, Unitarian Universalism is a big enough tent to include those who need to leave more exclusive traditions, but still hold some of the supernatural beliefs of Christianity, or Judaism, or evangelical Christianity even, or Mormonism. But it's also big enough to be home to humanists, and atheists, and agnostics, and people like me who it depends on the day. The Unitarian doctrine that God is one means people of all traditions are held in love here. Love is more important than doctrine in this congregation. We'll need one another to get through this life, to help us interpret the information that comes at us all the time. No matter how many facts we can call up, we need one another. We're in this life together. I was once called to minister to the family of an 18-year-old who had died in a traffic accident. I walked into the emergency room. No one had been there to see him yet. And there he was on the table with no obvious injuries. The doctors and nurses were unplugging him, getting ready for his family to see him. I sat there with him for a minute because you kind of don't know what to do for a minute except to be there. So I just was there for a minute. And then the doctor and I, the doctor who had never delivered a death notification, were charged with telling the dozens of family members gathered there who only knew that their son had been in a car crash, their grandson, their nephew, their brother. They were evangelical Christians. I was Unitarian Universalist. What was I going to say to these people? That they were Baptist and I was you hardly mattered, I can tell you. We were human to human in those moments. When they cried out to God, I didn't ask them whether they had really thought through their theology. My Unitarian Universalist faith served me in that moment by helping me remember that we don't all find meaning on the same paths. Something deep inside me wanted to pray with them, to cry out to a world cruel enough to allow something like that to happen. Broken hearts of all faith traditions speak the same wordless language. Could it be that in a time like ours, that is the point of free faith? Not to just proclaim that we don't believe in something, not to win arguments with all our facts, not to be the smartest people in the room. Because friends, if that's what we're about, that's a loser's fight. But could it be that the point of a free faith is to really unite us, even in an age when a glut of information threatens to tear us apart? To proclaim freedom from a humdrum existence, freedom from isolation, freedom to engage wholeheartedly and without fear in the human experience. That takes some conversation. We can do that. There is a freedom beyond individual intellectual freedom, as important as that is, and will always be. It's the freedom that only comes when your deepest values and the way you live your life are touching, at least, maybe are the same. That is the promise of a free faith. You don't have to hide here. Explore your path to meaning and truth with all your heart. Listen and learn from the pursuits of others. Celebrate what we share in common and what makes us different. Act on what you find to make the world better. Free faith, free and responsible. May we make it so. Amen.